Remember when a car could take a beating, shrug it off, and beg for more? The 1960s didn't just give us chrome and curves, it gave us machines built to outlast empires. Some were workhorses, some were quiet achievers, and a few are still out there, doing their job without complaint. Which ones made the cut? Well, let's just say some of these legends could survive long after their owners, and maybe still be running. 1960 to 1969 International Harvester Travelall. If the Chevrolet Suburban was the prom king, the International Harvester Travelall was the grizzled war veteran standing in the back, arms crossed, unimpressed. This was not a vehicle for people who cared about fashion. This was for people who needed something that could haul a small mountain and then plow through the next one without a hiccup. International Harvester was already famous for building farm equipment that would outlast the family that bought it. When they turned their attention to making a full-size SUV, the result was exactly what you'd expect. A truck wearing a wagon's body with zero concern for trends. The Travelall came on a beefy ladder frame chassis straight from IH's pickup line. It had leaf springs at all four corners and engines so overbuilt they practically laughed at the concept of maintenance schedules. Most were fitted with IH's own V8s, like the 304 and 345 cubic inch power plants, which were designed for industrial use first, family transport second. They weren't quick. Stepping on the gas was more of a suggestion than a command, but they'd run forever. These engines were notorious for surviving on old oil, questionable fuel, and a general lack of sympathy from owners who used them like tractors. The body panels were thick steel, the kind that would dent rather than tear, and rust protection was surprisingly good for the era. The interiors were Spartan but functional. Vinyl seats, steel dash, and switches big enough to use with work gloves on. Comfort wasn't the priority, longevity was. The Travelall never sold in massive numbers, partly because International Harvester didn't care about marketing like the big three did, but the ones that rolled off the line earned a reputation in rural America for being unstoppable. You could load them with hay bales, tow horse trailers, take the kids to school, and still have a truck that was ready to go 20 years later. Today, survivors are rare, but in farming communities, you'll still spot them. Often dented, often rusty, always still running. The Travelall didn't care about being pretty. It cared about showing up every single time you turned the key. And that's exactly why it belongs on this list. 1963 to 1967 Volvo Amazon 122S. The Volvo Amazon didn't look like a tank. It looked polite, friendly even. But underneath those soft curves was a car with the structural integrity of a bank vault and an engine that treated high mileage like a casual warm-up. Built in Sweden during an era when Volvo engineers seemed obsessed with building cars that could survive anything short of an asteroid strike, the Amazon, officially the 120 series, became a rolling testament to over-engineering. Its most famous heart was the B18 four-cylinder engine. This was an iron block, iron head masterpiece with simple pushrod design, perfectly balanced internals, and a reputation for running forever if you so much as looked at it with a wrench every once in a while. Many easily hit 300,000 miles without a rebuild. The transmission? Equally tough. Whether you got the 3-speed, 4-speed, or 4-speed with overdrive, each was a mechanical joy that just didn't break. The body structure was a breakthrough for the time, featuring crumple zones and safety belts as standard equipment, unheard of in the early 60s. Volvo cared about safety before safety was a selling point, which meant Amazons were built strong enough to keep their passengers alive and the car itself on the road for decades. Inside, the materials were chosen for durability. The vinyl seats resisted wear, the switchgear clicked with a satisfying firmness, and even the heater systems were known for soldiering on year after year without complaint. The paint jobs, thanks to Volvo's meticulous prep work, resisted rust better than most contemporaries, especially if the car stayed away from salted roads. The Amazon earned a quiet cult following. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was dependable in a way that made owners fiercely loyal. It was the kind of car you passed down to your kids, not because it was sentimental, but because you knew it would still be running when they needed it. Decades later, many Amazons are still on the road, often wearing their original engines and gearboxes. They might have faded paint or a few battle scars, but mechanically, they're as stubborn as the day they left Gothenburg. The Amazon proved that you didn't need to shout to be remembered. Sometimes, all you have to do is keep going year after year until everyone realizes you're still here. 1960 to 1966 Chevrolet CK Series pickups. Back in the early 60s, Chevrolet figured out a magic formula. Take a simple, rugged frame, bolt on a no-nonsense cab, drop in an engine that doesn't know how to quit, and sell it to anyone who needs a truck. The first-generation CK pickups weren't fancy, but they were built so well that many are still working for a living 6 decades later. Chevy offered them in 2 basic layouts, the C-Series for 2-wheel drive and the K-Series for 4-wheel drive. Under the hood, you could find everything from the bulletproof 235 cubic inch straight 6 to the now legendary 283 and 327 small block V8s. These engines were as close to immortal as you could get. The straight 6s in particular were the definition of tractor tough, able to rack up 300,000 miles with little more than regular oil changes and the occasional valve adjustment. The frames were heavy-gauge steel, fully boxed in key areas to handle loads that would make modern half-tons cry. Suspension was straightforward, coil springs up front, and leaf springs out back for the C-Series. Leafs all around on the K-Series. Simple, strong, and easy to fix with basic hand tools. No finicky electronics, no overcomplication, just honest engineering. Chevy also nailed something a lot of trucks of the era missed: ease of maintenance. The engine bays had room to work, the parts were interchangeable with countless other GM vehicles, and replacement bits were everywhere. Farmers loved them, contractors loved them, and weekend warriors discovered they could tow, haul, and commute without the truck breaking a sweat. The cab interiors were as durable as the mechanicals. Vinyl bench seats, steel dashboards, and rubber floor mats meant you could hose out the cab after a muddy day, and nothing would care. Paint quality wasn't perfect. Rust claimed many in northern states, but if the body survived, the drivetrain almost certainly did. Today, these first-gen CK trucks have collector value, but you'll still find plenty in small towns, carrying ladders, hay bales, or a bed full of tools. They're proof that a truck doesn't have to be high-tech to last forever. It just has to be built right the first time. 1962 to 1967, Morris Minor 1000. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when British cars were synonymous with durability. The Morris Minor 1000 wasn't fast, it wasn't luxurious, but it was so mechanically simple that breaking one almost took effort. The Minor 1000 came with the tiny but mighty A-Series engine, a 948cc or later 1098cc inline 4 that seemed to run on whatever you poured into the tank. It didn't make much power, but it would start on frosty mornings, idle like a sewing machine, and keep going for hundreds of thousands of miles if you treated it even halfway decently. The gearbox was a 4-speed manual with a light, precise shift action, and it was just as unkillable as the engine. The body sat on a unibody shell that, while prone to rust in wet climates, was easy to repair and had enough strength to handle rough British country lanes or unpaved colonial roads abroad. Suspension was ultra basic, torsion bars up front, leaf springs in the rear, and so straightforward that any small-town mechanic could rebuild it in an afternoon. The Minor was also ridiculously easy to work on. Everything under the hood was within reach. The wiring was simple enough to trace without a manual, and the parts catalog was so vast that you could practically build one from scratch with spares. That's why so many ended up far from home in places like Africa, Australia, and the Caribbean, where they quietly outlived flashier imports. Inside, comfort was minimal but sufficient. Vinyl seats, simple controls, and big, clear gauges made it feel like a friendly, mechanical pet, one that asked very little from you and gave decades of service in return. Even now, you can find Minors happily chugging along as daily drivers in rural towns, often owned by people who've had them for generations. They're a reminder that sometimes the secret to longevity isn't brute strength or massive power. It's keeping things so simple that there's almost nothing to go wrong. 1961 to 1969 Mercedes-Benz W110 Fintail. If the Volvo Amazon was a polite tank, the Mercedes W110 Fintail was a rolling fortress in a tailored suit. Built during Mercedes-Benz's peak over-engineering era, the W110 was designed with a single guiding principle: make it last longer than its first owner's lifetime. The W110 came in both petrol and diesel flavors, but it's the diesels, particularly the OM621 four-cylinder, that achieved legend status. They were slow, and by slow, we mean 0 to 60 in eventually, but they could rack up 1,000,000 kilometers without breaking a sweat. These engines were purely mechanical, with no fragile electronics to fail. As long as there was fuel in the tank, they'd run, even if that fuel was less than ideal. Mercedes engineers built these cars like commercial vehicles. Door hinges were massive steel pieces that still feel tight decades later. The body structure was reinforced in all the right places, and the paint process involved multiple coats of primer and lacquer that helped them resist rust better than most contemporaries. Inside, everything was meant to last. The MBTEX vinyl upholstery was nearly indestructible, dashboards stayed solid without cracking, and switchgear felt like it was milled from solid metal. Even the suspension bushings seemed immune to wear, and the ride quality remained composed long after lesser cars turned sloppy. The W110 also introduced advanced safety features for its time, including crumple zones and padded dashboards. Without sacrificing durability, many ended up as taxis in Africa, the Middle East, and South America, where they're still in service today, 50-plus years after they rolled out of Stuttgart. While they've become collectible now, the best part about a Fintail isn't the classic styling or the prestige. It's the fact that if you buy a good one, you might never need another car. They were built to be used, abused, and kept alive with basic tools, and that's why so many still are. 1960 to 1969 Dodge D-Series pickups. The 1960s Dodge D-Series pickups weren't built to win beauty contests. They were built to work, and keep working long after most trucks had been retired to the scrapyard. These were the kinds of rigs that farmers, ranchers, and construction crews would buy new, run hard for decades, and then hand down to someone who would run them even harder. Under the hood, Dodge offered engines that were practically unbreakable. The Slant 6, in particular, earned a reputation for being one of the toughest inline sixes ever made. It had a unique 30-degree lean that allowed for a lower hood line and gave it an almost industrial feel. Owners bragged about running these engines with little more than oil and gas, clocking 300,000 miles before even thinking about a rebuild. And if you wanted more grunt, Dodge had the LA Series V8s, simple, strong, and eager to work all day without complaint. The frames were heavy-duty steel, overbuilt for their rated loads. Dodge knew these trucks would be overloaded, and they engineered them to survive it. Suspension was straightforward, leaf springs front and rear, giving them a ride that could rattle your fillings, but would never leave you stranded. Four-wheel drive versions were especially sought after, featuring transfer cases and axles that could take a beating. Interiors were about as basic as they come: vinyl bench seat, steel dashboard, and big, glove-friendly controls. No frills, no fancy trim, just equipment that could survive years of dust, mud, and spilled coffee. The cab might rattle over rough roads, but the truck itself would keep pushing forward. Rust protection wasn't great, and plenty of D-Series trucks were eaten alive in northern climates. But in drier parts of the country, they often outlived their original owners. Many are still hauling, towing, or plowing today, proof that Dodge's no-nonsense approach to truck building in the 60s hit the sweet spot between simplicity and sheer toughness. 1966 to 1969, Toyota Corona, RT40, RT50. Before Toyota was a household name in America, they sent over the Corona, a small, unassuming sedan that quietly proved Japanese cars could match, and sometimes outlast, their American rivals. By the time the RT40 and later RT50 models hit U.S. shores in the mid to late 60s, Toyota had perfected the recipe for long life, simplicity, quality, and zero tolerance for sloppy manufacturing. The Corona's heart was the R-Series engine, typically a 1.5L or 1.6L inline-4. These motors were designed with overbuilt internals and precise tolerances that gave them incredible staying power. They weren't fast, but they started every morning, ran on modest fuel, and stayed smooth running well past the 200,000-mile mark at a time when most cars were done by 100,000. The body was a compact unibody, and Toyota paid extra attention to rust-proofing compared to many competitors. Even the suspension, simple McPherson struts up front and leaf springs out back, was built from quality steel that resisted fatigue. Owners quickly realized the Corona didn't demand constant tinkering. It just worked. Inside, you got durable vinyl upholstery, simple gauges, and controls that felt solid despite the car's modest price. The heater worked, the wipers worked, the lights worked, and they kept working year after year because Toyota wasn't cutting corners. The Corona earned a quiet but loyal fan base, especially among people who just wanted a car that wouldn't quit. Mechanics often found themselves with nothing to fix beyond basic wear and tear items, and in export markets like Australia and New Zealand, they proved they could handle harsh climates and rough roads just as well as they handled suburban commutes. Today, the Corona has been overshadowed by its more famous sibling, the Corolla. But in its day, it was Toyota's foot in the door, the car that showed America that a small Japanese sedan could go the distance and then some. 1960 to 1968, Ford Falcon. Before the Mustang stole the spotlight, the Ford Falcon was quietly rewriting the rulebook on what an affordable American car could be. Introduced in 1960, the Falcon was Ford's answer to the growing demand for compact, economical cars. But what made it unforgettable wasn't just the low price, it was the fact that these cars could seemingly run forever. The straight-six engines were the secret weapon. Ford offered them in several displacements, from 144 to 200 cubic inches, and every one of them was a model of simplicity and reliability, with cast-iron blocks, minimal moving parts, and a design that could tolerate a shocking amount of neglect. These motors routinely outlasted the bodies they were bolted into. Keep up with oil changes, and they'd easily cross 200,000 miles, a rare feat in the early 60s. The Falcon's engineering philosophy was less to break, less to fix. Rear-wheel drive, manual or simple automatic transmissions, and suspension made from heavy-gauge steel meant you could drive them hard without fear. Parts were shared with a variety of other Ford models, making repairs cheap and easy. The bodywork wasn't exotic, but it was sturdy enough to survive years of use. Rust was an enemy in snowy climates, but in drier regions, Falcons stayed solid for decades. Interiors were basic but functional. Vinyl seats, clear gauges, and controls you could operate with gloves on. Perhaps the Falcon's biggest legacy was its adaptability. It served as the platform for the first Mustang, the Ranchero car-truck hybrid, and even some early Australian performance sedans. But in its original form, it was a no-nonsense commuter that could soak up daily driving for years without complaint. Plenty of Falcons are still running today, especially in parts of the world where people value durability over flash. They may not turn heads, but for those who know, the Falcon's quiet toughness speaks volumes. 1963 to 1967 Peugeot 404. If you've ever been to a small African town and seen a dusty old sedan rolling by like it owns the place, there's a good chance it was a Peugeot 404. Built in France, but designed to conquer the world, the 404 earned its reputation as one of the toughest, most reliable cars of the 1960s, and it did so by combining simple engineering with nearly indestructible construction. The 404's engine lineup included robust 1.6L and 1.9L inline fours, some with fuel injection, others with carburetors. Either way, these were smooth, low-stress engines designed for longevity. The bottom ends were massively overbuilt for their modest output, and the cooling systems were up to the task of surviving Saharan heat without boiling over. The body was styled by Pininfarina, giving the 404 an elegant look that belied its toughness. Underneath, the frame and suspension were engineered to handle terrible roads. Independent front suspension with coil springs and a rugged rear live axle meant the car could handle everything from Paris boulevards to dirt tracks in rural Kenya. One reason the 404 thrived in remote areas was ease of maintenance. The engine bays were uncluttered, the electrical systems were minimal, and parts were easy to adapt or fabricate when factory spares weren't available. Taxi fleets loved them for their reliability, and many cars racked up over 500,000 miles in service. Inside, the 404 was comfortable but straightforward. Durable fabrics, clear gauges, and sturdy switchgear meant the interior aged gracefully. Owners discovered they could drive one hard for years with nothing more than basic servicing. Even today, you'll find 404s still operating in Africa, South America, and rural Europe, often with original drivetrains. They're not flashy, but they proved that a little French style and a lot of durability can go a very long way. 1964 to 1969 AMC Rambler American. AMC wasn't the biggest player in the 1960s car market, but with the Rambler American, they carved out a niche for people who valued practicality and longevity over horsepower or prestige. This was the car for families who wanted something that would start every morning, haul the kids, and keep doing it for years without complaint. The Rambler American came with a range of straight-six engines that were about as complicated as a hammer and just as reliable. The 199 and 232 cubic inch versions in particular had thick iron blocks, simple valve trains, and a reputation for surviving extreme neglect. Plenty of owners have stories about running them well past 200,000 miles with only the most basic maintenance. The car's unibody design was simple and strong, with good rust resistance compared to some competitors. Suspension was straightforward, coil springs up front, leaf springs in the rear, giving it a comfortable ride and minimal wear points. AMC also made a point of using durable interior materials that could stand up to years of use. The Rambler's real secret weapon was its low cost of ownership. Parts were inexpensive, fuel economy was solid for the era, and the cars were so easy to work on that even casual tinkerers could handle most repairs at home. This combination of low running costs and bulletproof reliability earned AMC a fiercely loyal customer base. Today, the Rambler American is a bit of a sleeper in the classic car world. They're not as flashy as a Mustang or a Camaro, but they're far more likely to still be on the road after 50 years, quietly proving that AMC knew a thing or two about building a car to last. 1961 to 1965 Land Rover Series 2A. The Land Rover Series 2A wasn't just built to last, it was built to survive in places where most cars wouldn't last a week. This was the vehicle of choice for farmers, explorers, and anyone whose idea of a commute involved crossing rivers or climbing rocky trails. Under the hood, the Series 2IA came with either a 2.25L petrol engine or a 2.25L diesel. Neither was fast, but both were designed for maximum durability and ease of repair in the field. You could strip and rebuild one with basic tools, and they were known to keep running even when seriously worn. The aluminum body panels were a huge advantage, making the IIA resistant to rust, a critical feature in wet climates or salty coastal areas. The chassis was heavy steel, and the suspension was pure utility, leaf springs and solid axles front and rear. This setup wasn't built for comfort, but it could take incredible abuse without failing. Inside, the Series 2A was as Spartan as they come. Vinyl seats, basic controls, and plenty of bare metal gave it a purposeful feel. Everything was designed to be hosed out if needed, because Land Rover knew their customers would get muddy, wet, and dirty. The global reputation for toughness meant these vehicles were used by militaries, aid organizations, and farmers alike. Many served in harsh environments for decades, and some are still in use today. The Series 2IA wasn't about style or speed, it was about getting you anywhere you needed to go, no matter how bad the road or weather. 1960 to 1969 Volkswagen Type 2 Bus. Few vehicles inspire as much affection as the Volkswagen Type 2, better known as the VW Bus. But beyond the nostalgia and counterculture image, the Type 2 earned a reputation for being almost unkillable, thanks to its simple mechanicals and rugged design. Power came from the air-cooled flat-4 engine shared with the VW Beetle. Displacements ranged from 1.2L to 1.6L, and while they didn't make much power, they were famously durable. The lack of a radiator meant fewer parts to fail, and the engines could keep going under conditions that would sideline more complex vehicles. The bus's simple frame and suspension were built for heavy loads and rough roads. The rear engine layout gave excellent traction, which made them surprisingly capable in poor weather or on unpaved roads. Maintenance was straightforward, with easy access to the engine and minimal electronics to worry about. Interiors were bare bones, but adaptable. The flat floor and boxy shape meant you could haul cargo, passengers, or both. Many buses were converted into campers, work vans, or mobile shops, and the fact that they kept working year after year only added to their legend. Perhaps the best testament to the Type 2's durability is how many are still on the road today, often having passed through multiple owners and countless road trips. They might be slow, but they're dependable in a way that wins loyalty for life. The 1960s didn't just give us beautiful designs and chrome trim. It gave us machines that could take a lifetime of punishment and still come back for more. From rugged pickups to unassuming sedans, these cars proved that durability isn't about hype, it's about honest engineering. Which of these legends would you trust for a cross-country run today? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and keep the memory of these road warriors alive.